Hi guys, I hope that you are well. Just setting up my phone here. Are we all good? There we go. Welcome to the first Baking Jam live. I'm just syncing up. We're all good. There we go. Hello, hello, hello. Now, phone is all set up. That's the hardest part. I can relax for the rest of the evening. Hello everybody. If you can send me a little message below to let me know if you can hear me okay, that would be amazing. Oh, in bed with COVID, that's not ideal. I hope you're feeling better soon. Hello Jenny, hello Grania. Hi guys, hi Colette. I hope you can all hear me. I see a couple of love hearts, which is doing wonders. Jenny, thank you so much. Amazing. Lovely, lovely, lovely. I just have my laptop here to one side, so I have questions and all of that here, so I'll be keeping an eye on that as well. How are you doing, Trish? God, there's a few people curled up in bed, so I'm keeping you company this evening. We'll try and make a positive out of this if we can. Hi, Cassie. Amazing. We got loads of people joining in. So as I was saying, welcome to the very first Baking Gems with Shane. So this is a collaboration, obviously, that I'm doing with Gem Foods as their brand ambassador. And we always get tons of questions, as in baking related questions. What can I do if this happens? Or can I substitute this for this? Or, things like that. So we thought it was a great idea to start up a little mini series just to answer some of your questions. So throughout this live, it'll probably last for in around, I would say, 25 minutes or so. If you have any baking related questions, just pop them into the question box below here, I think, and I'll be able to keep an eye on that. Now, I have a bank of questions. Myself and the guys over at Gem put out the questions, I think it was on Friday. So we collected questions on Instagram and on Facebook. So I have a load of questions here. Thank you so much to everyone who submitted their questions in over the weekend. Really do appreciate it. Firstly, I don't know where you're all tuning in from, so I'd love to know where you're all watching from. If you could let me know where it is. I know some of you are in bed. If we can get a broader location, that would be amazing. I'm based in Dublin at the moment, and the sun, well, I wouldn't say the sun is shining, but it's a beautiful warm day. So I hope that we've got leek slip, amazing. I hope that you're all enjoying the weather. If it's nice, we've got Clondalkin coming in there as well. Hi, the Netherlands. We're winning from the furthest destination so far. We got Dublin there again. Thank you for tuning in from the Netherlands. Beautiful country. Cassie's coming, Cork. We have Nace. Good local contingency. There we go. There's Limerick after popping in there as well. North Wales, Dawn, thank you so much. Charlene, we have Cavan. So yeah, we've got a great little audience. Cork-like. couldn't not do it. Baldoyle, Limerick. Amazing. We've got a good selection from all over the country. So to the Netherlands and to Wales, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope the weather is as nice over there as it is here. Lovely Leacher, Marie, I couldn't agree anymore. Tipperary, Monaghan, Colette, yes, of course. Amazing. That's amazing. So, yes, as I was saying, we have started this Baking Gems with Shane. So it's all about, I suppose, having chats, informal get-togethers, just chatting about baking and what works, what doesn't work, any little tips and tricks. So this is the first of a series that we're doing. So we have a few more coming up, all with different themes. Today's theme is all about what went wrong. And I could write a small book about questions people ask me, what did I do wrong, or what went wrong here? So that's the questions we put out the weekend on Friday. So we got tons of questions in here. So there's lots of people that are amateur and avid bakers, and they have just asked me a load of questions as to what might have went wrong when they were baking. So I'm here to answer your questions. Again, I said I know we have people joining in from all over Ireland and further afield. So again, please do pop your questions in the comment section below. Hey, Jam is on board, guys. Jam is here. Everybody relax. We're all good. Thank you so much. So yes, if you have any questions, please do pop them in, and I'll keep an eye on the comment section below, and I'll be able to answer those, hopefully, as we go along. So we're going to get started here. So I've got my laptop set up here, so I'm just going to be keeping an eye on these questions and your questions hopefully as well. So question number 1 comes in from Anne, and she wants to know why does the chocolate on my millionaire shortbread crack when I cut it? So that is, again, a very popular question, as are most of the questions that we get in today. So what I would say to you is, with millionaire shortbread, obviously you've got your 3 layers, your biscuit, your caramel, and your chocolate, okay? So when you're putting your last layer on top of your millionaire shortbread, which is the chocolate, ideally you want to pop that into the fridge to let that firm up. Now, the one thing is, when you try to cut chocolate that is cold, it is going to crack. And you have to keep in mind of the different textures that you have. You've got really hard chocolate, you've got creamy, velvety caramel, and then you've got like a buttery biscuit base in there as well. So you've got 3 different textures. So if your chocolate is really, really hard and you press down, you're actually going to crack the chocolate and you're going to press down the caramel and you're going to squeeze that. And it kind of ruins the look of your caramel squares, especially when you put so much work into it. So 2 things that you need to do. The first thing is either take your caramel squares out of the fridge and leave them out at room temperature for about 20-25 minutes. That will just give the chocolate time to come to room temperature, and when you cut it, it will cut nice and neatly. You're going to need to use a hot, sharp knife. So get a good chopping knife, run that underneath a hot water. Make sure you dry it off with a kitchen cloth, and that will get you a lovely clean cut when you're cutting your millionaire shortbread. Another thing that you can do is you can add a tiny little bit of oil, like an unflavored oil, like a sunflower or a vegetable oil, into your chocolate. And what happens is then when you pop that into the fridge, it will firm up, but it doesn't firm up solid. It has a little bit of softness to it, and then you can cut it directly from the fridge. But if you're just putting plain chocolate on top, what I would say is take it like 20 minutes or so beforehand, and then you'll get a nice clean cut on your caramel. So next question is Marion. Marion wants to know, when you're making a fatless sponge, 4 flour, 4 eggs, 4 sugar, is it best to whip the mix very stiff before folding in the flour? I generally cook it at 180. Should I lower my temperature if I have a fan oven? And I presume always best eaten on the day that you make. So there's lots in that question there. So what I would say, whenever you're making a fatless sponge, absolutely, the key is to whisk up your wet ingredients first, as thick as possible. So what you are looking for is your whisk to leave a trail of mix on top of your mixture. So whisk up all of your ingredients and you lift up your whisk, drizzle that over the top of your mixture. And if that mix just sits on the top like a nice ribbon, then you know it's lovely and thick. If it kind of sinks back into the mix and disappears, then you need to whisk it a little bit more. So whisk up your sponge, your wet ingredients until it's nice and thick, then fold through. Now, there's different recipes called for different temperatures when it comes to sponges. I generally always bake my fatless sponges and stuff in an oven at about 170 degrees Celsius. That would be 150 fan. So if you are baking yours at 180 and you have a fan oven, what I would say is you probably would be better to drop that to about 160, 165, and you should get good results with that as well. And then I always say with sponges, especially if you're assembling them, definitely best eaten on the day. You're better to do that on the day because they're relatively easy to make. They take about half an hour or so to bake in the oven. So you can put it into a Tupperware box, cover it, and that will keep it fresh. And then you can use it the next day. Hi, who we got? Catherine. Hi, Catherine. Yes, the newsletter went out last week, so maybe you missed the sign up date. If not, check your spam folder. It could have went in there instead. So yeah, that was sent out last Thursday, but coming up in 2 weeks ago. So just keep an eye out. The next one will be coming up next week. For anyone who hasn't subscribed to my newsletter, you can do so on my website. We've got a really nice one coming up this week as well. Anyways, back to our questions here. I hope that answered your question, Marion, about your sponge. We have Helen up next, and Helen wants to know, why did my tea bag texture come out rock hard instead of being soft? So what I would say to you here, and as well with a lot of the questions that we have here, there are a few possible scenarios that could have caused what happened. So what I would say to you is, generally speaking, when I'm making a tea bag, I don't put in fat. So there's no butter in there. It's basically your eggs and your wet tea that you've soaked your fruit in. So number one, what I would say to you is, I'm not sure what recipe you used. So it could be the recipe. If it's not the recipe, then what I would say is always soak your fruit. So whether you're using a mixture of raisins, sultanas, currants, always soak your fruit in tea. What I like to do is hot tea, just plain straight up breakfast tea. If you want to get all fancy, you can use Earl Grey or jasmine tea. Soak your tea overnight, and then the following day you're going to be putting that into your tea brak mix, and also put the liquid in too. That will keep it nice and soft when you're baking it. And also, because you're adding in no fat, generally when I'm making a tea brak, I don't add fat in. So that added moisture helps your tea brak to remain that little bit soft as well. Another little tip I like to do with your tea brak as well is when it comes out of the oven hot, take it out of the tin and wrap it up in a tea towel when it's still hot. What happens is that kind of keeps all of the steam in there, and it also kind of goes back into your tea brak, and that does soften it up. It's kind of the same process when you bake brown bread, and sometimes the crust on the brown bread can just be that little bit too hard. When it's still warm, wrap it in a tea towel, and again, that steam that is created will help soften up the bread before you slice it. Just as a point of reference, there is an absolutely gorgeous hot whiskey, I was going to say Irish whiskey, hot whiskey tea brak recipe on the Gem website. We done it for St. Patrick's weekend. Absolutely gorgeous. And I'm not just saying that because I made it. It is such a beautiful recipe. And again, if you don't take alcohol, or you're not making it without whiskey, just soak it in tea instead. It's a really, really, really nice one. So hop on over to Gem Packed Foods website, and you'll be able to find that recipe. What's this question here? Made a lemon drizzle and it collapsed when I took it out of the oven. What am I doing wrong? Again, we're going to touch base on that one, Catherine, as we get down. We've got quite a similar question to that. So I will revert back to that question when we get to it. But that's a really, really a popular one. So don't worry, you're not the only person that happens to. It's happened to me. If I had €1 for every time a sponge collapsed on me, I would be living in the Bahamas, retired at this stage. So it happens to us all. So don't worry about that. What is up next? My cake looks perfect. I don't have a name for this one, sorry. My cake looks perfect, but when I cut into it, it's dense at the bottom. What am I doing wrong? Okay, so that is a question. Again, I don't have that person's name. They didn't have it linked to the question. But to answer that question, there are a number of things where your cake looks beautiful, but when you cut into it, you always have that undercooked layer at the bottom, okay? What I would say to you is make sure that your oven is preheated to begin with. Before we start even making your cake, make sure if you're baking your cake at 180, 160, whatever the recipe calls for, ensure that your oven is preheated. So if that takes 10 minutes, make sure that when you turn your oven on, then start weighing up all of your ingredients. By the time everything is ready, your oven will be nice and hot. What I would say with this here, the chances is your oven temperature could be a little bit too low. That means that your cake is baking and it's rising slowly, but because there's an underbaked part on the bottom of your oven, it would make me think that perhaps your oven temperature is a little bit too low, so you might need to increase it. Position of the sponge in the oven is key. Always have your sponge in the middle of your oven. If you have it on the bottom, you run risk of the bottom not cooking. If you have it on the top, you run risk of the top cooking before the center and base is cooked. So again, for a nice even temperature and even baking, put it in the center of your oven. I got my pint of tea, as you can see. Don't open your oven during baking. That's a golden rule, and I'm the most impatient person in the world. Try not to open your oven, because what you're doing is you're letting all of that lovely heat out and you're letting cool air in, which is going to affect the bake, and the sponge will sink and the bottom of it will be a little bit raw as well. And a key thing, and this might sound ridiculous, but it is so important. Check the dates on your raising agent, whether you are using baking powder, bread soda, whatever the recipe calls for. Check your dates. Baking soda, bicarbonate of soda, or baking powder is just one of those things that we have sitting on our baking counters or in the press, and we use a little bit at a time, whether it's half a teaspoon or 1 teaspoon. Just always check the dates on your baking powder, because it's happened to me before where I might have 2 or 3 baking powders, and I'm the worst in the world for having different ones opened, just to ensure that your baking powder is in date, because that can be something that can trip you up as well. Angela sent a message wanting to know, it's not a baking, well, it kind of is a baking related question. When any plans to write a cookery book? Thank you, Angela. We have another question here as well. I'll get back to that one now. When making white bread, I always get white yeasty taste of it. Would it be the yeast I'm using? Yeah, I would say that your yeast, generally 1 loaf is 7 grams. So I would say that you probably need to prove it a little bit longer if your yeast is you're getting that yeasty taste. Yeah, I would, or even you can reduce the yeast if you want, but just keep in mind that you are going to have to prove it for longer, Cassie. So that just take that into consideration. By reducing the yeast, you're going to slow down the fermentation and the yeast process. So just keep that in mind. You might need to prove it a bit more than you would obviously if you had more yeast in there. Angela, yes, about the cookbook, that is the dream, that is the plan. I would say that you need lots of followers on Instagram these days for publishers to see that you're out there. So tell your friends, tell them all to come over and follow me, and then hopefully that'll work. But yeah, that would be the plan, hopefully down the line, to have something. So yes, thank you for asking. At least I know I'm going to sell one book between you now and my mum. That's 2 books in the bag straight away. So thank you, Angela. Dawn, when I make a loaf cake is always dense and doesn't rise. Again, Dawn, what I would say to you, reverting back to the answers that I just done on that last one, what I would say is check the date on your raising agent. Don't open your oven as you're baking it, and just ensure that your oven is preheated as well. If your oven isn't preheated, you run the risk of your cake not rising as well. There's also, depending on some sponges that you bake as well, if you over whisk or over cream your butter and sugar, you're adding too much air into your sponge. So when it bakes, those air pockets obviously burst and your cake then kind of sinks. So there is a happy medium of getting a light, creamy sponge consistency, and there also is an element of over creaming your cake mix. So again, don't put it on and walk away from it for half an hour, because you could run the risk of it collapsing in the oven. But again, if it's a constant problem, what I would say to you could be the recipe as well. Just keep an eye on that. I've got tons of recipes on my Instagram page here. If you're looking for a marble cake, I have a beautiful chocolate and vanilla marble cake recipe. Very, very simple, guaranteed to rise every time. It's tried and tested. It's a really, really nice one. So just check out my page for that one. Moira asks, when I bake cupcakes, they're greasy on the bottom and heavy. Help. And I think the help might have been in capital letters. Moira, I hear you. I feel your pain. We've all been there. A little tip when it comes to summer at UCD. Suzanne, hello. Lovely for you. Thanks for joining in. Moira, yes. So basically greasy on the bottom. Little tip, I think a few people might know of this. When you're baking your cupcakes, just take a sprinkling or a good pinch of rice. So uncooked rice. Put that into your cupcake tin. Then put your cupcake case in and fill it with your mix, and away you go. And that way then the I suppose the grease and the butter and the fat, depending on the recipe, the rice soaks that up, so the bottom of your cupcake actually doesn't go greasy. Just a little tip there again, a handful of uncooked rice, not the rice that you're going to have for dinner, uncooked rice into the base of your cupcake tin, and then put your container in there, and then continue as normal, and that will alleviate the greasiness off the bottom of your cupcake. And again, when it's not rising, you need to look at your recipe. So it's either that you don't have enough eggs in the mix, or if you're using a raising agent, that you're not having enough raising agent. And always very important, whenever you're using a raising agent in any bake, whether that's a tea loaf or cupcakes, sieve your flour and your baking mix. Because what happens is, whether it's baking powder or bicarbonate of soda that you're putting in there, you want that to be evenly dispersed through your flour. Thus, when you mix it through your mix, it'll be evenly dispersed. So again, if you are using any raising agent, sieve that into your mix. Jacinta, thank you, Jacinta. I hope that you're picking up 1 or 2 little nuggets of wisdom here. Jennifer asks, I find making caramel tricky. Any tips? Yes. Okay, Jennifer, again, caramel is one of those things. I even find it myself. You could make 10 batches and they would all be perfect, and you'll get one that will crystallize on you. So again, it is just one of those things. 2 things that I would say to you key when it comes to making caramel. Make sure that the saucepan that you're using, that you're making your caramel in, is not bigger than the heat element. So if you're using quite a wide base saucepan and you're using, whether it's an induction hob or an electric hob, if the hob or the heat itself is 4 inches and the pot is 6 inches, the outside of that won't end up in the bottom. Okay, I have just seen that, Martina. I'll jump back to that question. So when you put your caramel into your sugar and water in there, the center of that will start to caramelize before the outside, because there's no direct heat. So that will crystallize before, like obviously the middle will be going nice and golden brown, and the outside will be crystallized. So just ensure that the base of your pot is the same size or smaller than the heat element that you're using. So the full base of your pot is getting direct heat. That's number one. And number two is, do not be tempted to stir it. It's one of those things you just have to ignore and walk away. Well, not leave the house, walk away, but just walk away from it. As in, what you want to do is mix your sugar, if you're doing a wet caramel, is mix your sugar and your water, make a little paste initially and put that on the heat. You want a very, very low heat so the sugar dissolves into the water. That leaves you with a lovely sweet syrup. Then you turn it up, and then that creates your nice caramel. So don't put your sugar water in and then crank it up, because it will burn on you. Will you do a cookbook soon? Loved all your videos during lockdown, made everyone, and they never failed. Thank you so much. Do you know what? I think there's times that you have to be proud when you say something. I love trialing all my recipes. I will never put a recipe out there that I haven't made at home in my own kitchen, in my own oven. So that's something that I do pride myself on, and that really means a lot to me when somebody says that they've made my recipes and they work out, because that is the goal at the end of the day. There's no point in me putting up fancy desserts and they don't work. So I really do appreciate that. Jumping back to the question in regards to the cherries sinking in the cherry cake, wash your cherries. If you're using glacé cherries, they generally are quite sticky, and rinse them in warm water and pat them dry with kitchen paper, toss them in a little bit of flour, and then that will kind of stop them from sinking to the bottom of the loaf again. So sticky cherries, wash them, pat them dry, toss them in just a little bit of plain flour, and then mix them through your cake mix, and that will stop them from sinking to the bottom. Where are we going here? Lena wants to know, I make muffins, but I find that they still taste of oil. What do I do? So yes, when you're making muffins, sometimes, generally speaking, it's not made on a butter base, it's made on an oil base. Just ensure that you're using a flavorless oil. So sometimes rapeseed oil has a bit of a flavor to it, as does olive oil. Some olive oils can actually have almost like a herby kind of flavor to it as well. So what I would say to you is, whenever you are using oil, I would generally go with like a vegetable oil or a sunflower oil. That way you're just getting the benefits of using oil in a muffin, but not the flavor. And if you're very sensitive to it and you're still picking up a little bit of flavor, then you need to increase some of your other flavors. So if it's lemon muffins, you need to start adding in a little bit more lemon zest. You need to add in a little bit more vanilla extract, and that will hopefully mask the flavor of the oil, but we'll go with a neutral oil whenever you're baking. Mary Ellen, why did my bread not rise once it was baked? So again, this is jumping back into yeast breads. So Mary Ellen, there is a few elements here that could have went wrong, okay? So when you are baking a yeast bread, you need to prove it and you need to knock it back. So when you're knocking a bread back, you need to punch it, knock all the air out, knead it on the table, reshape it, and that strengthens the gluten in your bread, and it also creates those nice air pockets that help the bread to rise when it's proving and when it's baking. You could have too much or too little yeast. That can affect, because sometimes your bread can rise too fast and then it can collapse, or the other side of the coin, you might have enough yeast and then that will just take ages for it to prove. And then your oven not hot enough. If your oven, what is it? Why are my meringues drying? Cheery, okay, more, we'll jump onto that one in a second. So when basically the oven is not hot enough, you need your oven really hot. I know it goes against everything that we're accustomed to turn your oven up to 230. You're going to be like, it's going to explode and the house is going to burn down, but you need your oven nice and hot. You're better to get a good hot oven, turn it down once the bread goes in there again, and that will allow your bread to rise properly. What I would say, if your kitchen is anyways cold at all, you need to kind of almost create your own prover. So what I would say, what I generally do is just take a baking tin and get my oven nice and hot, and I will, as I'm shaping my bread, or my bread's proved, almost ready to go into the oven, I will throw some water into the baking tray in the oven. That almost creates a little bit of steam in the oven. So actually I'm getting sidetracked. So this is proving your bread. So when you're proving your bread, you want to have it on the lowest setting. So again, 50, 60 degrees, and throw a little bit of water onto a tray, and you're creating like a very gentle, warm humidity, and that will help your bread to rise. Definitely on the lowest setting. The more higher you go, you're going to cook your bread. And jumping back to the meringue question, why are my meringues chewy and dusty? They're just being overbaked and they're just being left in the oven for too long. So generally speaking, my rule of thumb is if I'm making a meringue mix, if you're making like individual size meringues, like one portion meringue, I'd be baking them for no more than 35, 40 minutes. And then once they're baked, take them out and let them cool at room temperature. And that way you'll still have like a moussey, pillowy, marshmallowy center. I think for years, people always say is turn your oven off, let them cool completely in the oven. The longer you leave your meringues in the oven, the drier they're going to get. So if you like a dry meringue, let them cool completely in the oven. If you like a softer, more marshmallowy meringue, take them out after about 35, 40 minutes. Joanne, why do my cakes sink in the middle once baked? So this is jumping back to the question we had previously about the lemon drizzle cake and it's sinking in the middle. So what happens is, again, your cake sinking in the middle is a couple of issues there. Your oven could be running on too high of a temperature. So it rises too fast and then the center of the cake is not cooked. So the outsides is, and then it just collapses in on itself. So it's important that your oven isn't too cold or it isn't too hot. This is like Goldilocks and the porridge. You just have to find that perfect, nice warm temperature. If you open your oven door before it's finished baking, that will cause it to collapse in the middle. Again, patience. If the recipe calls for 35 minutes, then don't open the door before that length of time as well. What I would say a note is invest in an oven thermometer. If your oven is a little bit old, it could be running at a couple of degrees higher or colder than what a recipe calls for. And if you're a little bit unsure, oven thermometers are very inexpensive. You can order them online and you pop them into the oven and that will give you an accurate reading as well. So that's just good to know. Should I weigh egg whites when making macarons? Absolutely, yeah. When you're making macarons, you generally should, because there's so many recipes. Well, what I would say, depending on the recipe that you're using, if it calls for a weight, if it is, generally speaking, a medium egg is 20 grams for the yolk and 30 grams for the white. So if it calls for 45 grams, then yes, you're going to need to weigh up your whites, because between small, medium, large and extra large eggs, the egg whites are going to vary in size and weight, and that will affect your recipe. So invest in a good scales as well that you can weigh your egg whites. Sue, my scones rise funny. They almost topple over when baking. What am I doing wrong? Yes. I'm going to take a sip of tea here for the scone question, because it's one I get all the time. I think we've all baked scones and they split in the center and kind of puff up. There's nothing wrong with that. They're not uniformed and they don't rise perfectly. So what I would say is, if that is happening, there's a number of reasons. You're using too much baking powder in your recipe. That could be reason number one. So just check that as well. You should know if you're using too much baking powder, because you will get that aftertaste of baking powder, which is not particularly nice when you use too much in scones. Don't use a food processor when you're blending your flour and butter and all of that together. A scone mix is very gentle. The less touching, the less kneading, the better. And that's something to keep in mind with scones. So just remember, it's an extremely, extremely gentle dough. So try not to use a food processor if you can't. Again, points here, no kneading, don't over knead it. When your mix comes together in the bowl, turn it out onto the table. You don't even need to roll it with a rolling pin, just pat it down. Again, what I'd be saying, about 2.5 inches in height is the ideal size. Gentle when handling it. When you're cutting your scone, dust your scone cutter in flour and then press straight down. Don't twist, don't anything. If you press straight down, that leaves it nice and clean. So when it bakes, it rises more than rises at an angle. So again, that's important when you are cutting your scone as well. And as well, take a little bit of care when you're egg washing. If you've done all of these things perfect and then you're egg washing and you're spilling egg down the side of the scone, that will affect how it rises as well. You'll get a straight scone if you don't twist the cutter when cutting them. Yes, Sandra, yeah, that's perfect. We're on the same wavelength there as well. So again, nice clean cut, dust it in flour, press down, lift up, and then you get a nice scone. So there are a couple of things that'll help. Margaret wants to know, how can I pipe even-sized meringues or choux buns? Mine are always different sizes. Some are overbaked by the time that the larger ones are cooked. Okay, Margaret, that is a really, really, really good question. What I would say to you is whether you are making meringues, whether you're making profiteroles, anything that you need uniformity in size, take your sheet of parchment paper and put it on your table and use a measure, whether that's a bottle cap or whatever you have in the kitchen, a little cutter with a pen, pencil, marker, whatever you have. Draw out 20 whatever circles on your sheet, allowing space between them because your profiteroles will expand, meringues not so much. So then when you have your sheet all laid out with all of your perfectly round circles, turn that over so like the ink part is on the bottom, put that onto your tray, and then through the parchment paper you will see those little rings, and then use them as a guideline. So when you're piping your meringue or your choux pastry onto the parchment paper, use the circles that you've just traced on the opposite side as a guide. That way then when you're baking your choux pastry for 25 minutes, it will all bake evenly. Every choux bun will be baked at the same time. So that is a very good question. Dan, my cakes are often cracked on the surface. How do I prevent this? Couple of key points to remember, whether it's a sponge or a loaf cake, if it's baking on top. The temperature of your oven is too high. The outside of the cake cooks much faster than the center, and then a crust forms and then it splits because again, the oven is too hot. So again, oven temperature is key there. Secondly, your tin is too small for the amount of cake batter that you're using. So if you're using quite a large mix and you're putting all of that into an 8-inch cake tin and it's splitting or it's cracking and there's mix coming out the top, then your cake tin is too small. So either reduce the amount of mix that you're putting in or increase the size of your tin, and that should hopefully stop that from cracking. Also over mixing. When you get your butter, sugar, eggs, flour, all that in there for your mix, if you over mix your cake batter, you're building up the gluten, and that is going to make your cake tougher, and it generally can crack when it bakes. So try not to over mix it. Joan wants to know, can I use regular salted butter instead? Can I use regular salted butter instead of unsalted butter? What I generally say is, rule of thumb, I like to bake with unsalted butter because I can control the amount of salt that I'm putting into my bakes. Because if you're going to be using salted butter and then you're adding more salt, it's kind of hard to track how much salt is actually going in. Salt is very important when baking. It helps with the browning, it helps with the caramelization of all of your bakes. So salt is key whenever you bake. But if you can bake with unsalted butter, and then if you're adding a pinch of salt in or 5 grams, at least you know then how much salt. Listen, at the end of the day, if you're baking something and you don't have unsalted butter in the house, salted is completely fine. What I would say is, just if the recipe does call for half a teaspoon of salt or a pinch of salt, just leave that out because you already have salt in your butter, so that will do the job. Why does my baked cheesecake split? No name on that one. You can overmix your initial mix and that will cause it to split. What I always find as well with like a New York style baked cheesecake is that when you're taking it out of a hot oven and you put it directly into a cold fridge, that change of temperature can cause the cheesecake to split on top. It almost shocks the cheesecake. So what I would say is, take your cheesecake out of the oven, let it sit somewhere that's warm-ish, and just let it cool down naturally for about maybe 15-20 minutes, and then once it's a little bit cooler, then you can chill it down. I find taking it directly from the hot oven into a cold fridge, it's just a little bit too severe, and that can cause a split on top. But if your cheesecake does split on top, no worries, that's what we have fresh fruit for, so don't be worrying at all. Lash on the strawberries, lash on the chocolate sauce, you can cover all of that up. So it's not a huge deal, but if you are wondering why, that could be a couple of reasons. Mary wants to know, what would be causing my tea brack or my fruit loaf to crumble when I'm cutting it? And that is another extremely popular question that I get. So what I would say to you is, that is generally down to the amount of sugar that you're putting into your bakes. So basically, sugar is added into a recipe to tenderize, to keep it nice and soft and moist. So obviously that draws the moisture. So if you have too much sugar in your bakes, then it can crumble. So if you are having a tea brack or a fruit loaf or something that is that's cracking on you, try reduce your sugar. So just reduce your sugar ever so slightly, and that should eliminate all of the cracks. Would you believe it? That is all my questions. What did we have there? We had almost 18 questions there. from you guys, which is amazing. And it's lovely to see so many of you still here with me. I thought that you would have nodded off. I hope the few of you that are feeling unwell in bed haven't nodded off. Maybe my voice does that to people. Hopefully you're in a deep sleep. Thank you so much for watching. Again, if you have any questions, don't be afraid to fire them into the question box now, and I will do my best to answer them. So yeah, that was the first series of Baking Gems with Shane. I think it's important to kind of chat about these things. There's no such thing as a silly question, or I've spent my life baking and I'm still trying to figure out some recipes and what happens and what causes what, so those are all things that we're all going to be. You're very welcome, Martina. All things that we're here to learn and teach. So again, if you Sandra, thank you very much, Sandra. So yeah, we have a few more series lined up with different themes. We're dedicating one. Thanks, Jenny. That is Love the Rice tip. Joyce, yeah, I know that could have been my retirement fund. I should have saved that secret for myself, but you all have it now. Jacinta, thank you so much. Dawn, thank you. Such a lovely group in this evening. Colette, thank you very much. So again, yeah, we have actually a dedicated class that we're going to be doing on thank you so much. It's a lovely message. Keep up the good work, love your attitude to baking. And that's lovely. Thank you. We're doing one on substituting things. Can I use this instead of this? That is such a popular one. Thank you, Maura. So that is going to be a series that we're going to be featuring quite soon. And yeah, keep an eye out on the Gem social media sites and my own for that. We will be who is this? Imelda, missed the rice question. What was that? No, Imelda, you were late to the class, so we cannot divulge that information. That is, I'm only joking. Someone asked about their cupcakes being a little bit greasy on the bottom, and what way is the best way to eliminate this. If you put a good pinch of uncooked rice into your baking cases, and then put your paper cases in your cupcake mix and bake them as normal, the rice absorbs any of that grease that sometimes can come out from the bottom of the cupcake, especially if it's a butter-based mix you're using. So again, uncooked rice on the bottom, and that will eliminate that. So that is that question. Again, I'm going to be saving this down. So if you're watching now, thank you so much. If you're watching from the future, welcome. I hope that these little tips help. And as I said, we have tons of exciting baking series coming up and a lot more Q&As. So again, if you have any baking queries, any questions, big, small, again, please fire them over my way, or especially over to Jem as well. The guys over there will be watching all of the comments. So if you have any questions there, fire them over to Jem or myself, and we will we'll get back to you on that one. So the next series is coming up soon. Keep an eye on the Gem social media. They'll be able to announce what the next topic that we will be discussing. This is like baking therapy. I'm relaxed, super chilled after all of this. I hope you all enjoyed. Thank you for taking the time out of your evening to spend it with myself. I really do appreciate it. Repeating the rice tip, I missed it too. Amazing tip. No problem at all, Ruth. So thank you so much, guys, again. Really enjoyed having you all here for this live, and I will be talking to you all soon. Okay, take care.